mind. Okay, good morning, everyone. Can I ask everyone to sit down and we'll make a start with the meeting, please? Okay, so welcome to the Corporate Governance Committee. Obviously, we've got a lot of new members, so welcome to you all. The first item on the agenda is the election of chairman. So can I ask for nominations, please?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to nominate Mr. Stuart Bray.
And do we have any other nominations?
I'd like to second Stuart Bray.
Okay. And do we have any other?
I'd like to nominate Mr. Kevin Crook.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for that?
I second, yeah.
Okay, so if we just need to have a ballot for that, then if you can just bear with us for a moment.
Okay, so we've just had a look through the Constitution. Apologies, everyone, for the delay. It's an unusual situation arising. The Constitution meeting procedure rules provides that we need to have a fresh ballot. So we'll circulate a fresh set of sheets, and we keep going until we've sorted it out, I think, is the answer. It's in Standing Order 27, if anyone wants to have a look at it, but that's the provision. Okay, so we'll circulate fresh papers. So Mrs Taylor has joined the meeting as a substitute for Mr Page, who will stand down. So we're going to take the vote again, and we'll circulate the papers and take it from there. Thank you. So 7 votes for Mr Bray, 6 for Mr Crook. So Mr Bray, please take the chair. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Bit of drama for the first Corporate Governance Committee of the year. Well, thank you very much for electing me as chair. Now is the election of vice chair. Can I ask for nominations, please? Mr. Poland? Is
I'd like to nominate Joel May.
that seconded? Mr. Bowles? Yes, please.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Kevin Crook.
Okay, so again, we're back to a ballot, I think. Just bear with us a second. So the vote is 7 votes to Mr. Mear, 6 votes to Mr. Crook. So Mr. Mear is elected vice chair of the committee. Thank you. So moving on then to the minutes. I think most of us weren't on the committee at the time, so but I do propose that the minutes are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that seconded? Yeah, seconded by Mr. Mear. Is that agreed? Any against? No, so that's agreed. Questions? I've not received any questions. Questions by members? No member questions. Other items of business? There are no urgent items of business. So any declarations of interest? No. Presentation of petitions. I'm not aware of any petitions. I'm going to change the item. Yeah. Yeah, so if it's okay, because Lauren's got to leave at a certain point, we want to take items 17 and 18 next, if that's possible, please. So we now move on to, yes, you can.
The flag ceremony is happening in 10 minutes, I think. Could we have an adjournment for that?
I'm advised that as it's a public meeting that's being webcast, I'm afraid we can't really, sadly. So there is no provisions for doing that, although I would quite like to go myself if we could, but clearly can't.
There's no minutes.
The advice is not.
Well, can we try and get through the 2 items that Lauren needs to be here for in the next 10 minutes, and then we'll take a view then. That's okay. I would be quite keen that we did break for a few minutes just to attend that, if we can. Okay, so item 17, please, Lauren.
Thank you, Chair. This is a report on the dispensations for members, hopefully non-controversial, to allow for members to participate in decision-making relating to the member allowance scheme. Otherwise, it's a disclosable pecuniary interest. There's some legal uncertainty in relation to the implications of the DPI arrangements. We take the cautious approach here to protect members and their interests, to avoid any criminality, if you like, because it is a criminal offence, the failure to disclose a DPI at the appropriate point, and to grant a dispensation so that members can participate in decision making without any risk to their being subject to investigation by the police, in other words. So it's a 4-year dispensation. It's following good practice, removes the risk for members, and that is the recommendation. The dispensation has been in place previously, so it's just being renewed in effect in light of the fact that we're into a new council year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lauren. Any questions or comments on that? People happy to approve that item? I'll move it. Is it seconded? Seconded by Mr. Mear. All agreed? Any against? No, that's carried. Thank you. And then item 18 then, which is the annual report. Again, I think Lauren's going to say a few words on this.
Yes, simply just to introduce this, Chair, it's the annual report which will go to Council. Committee's asked to just review and feed in any comments that you may have on the report. I don't think there's anything I can really add to it, Chair.
Thank you, Laura. Obviously, next year's annual report will probably be more relevant for this committee, because obviously this is the work that's been done, but it's a bit of an anomaly because of the elections in between, but I'm happy to move it. Has anybody got any questions or comments? No? People happy? I'll move. Is it seconded? Mr. Mear, all agreed? So that'll now go on to Council. Okay, so I am going to propose then that we adjourn for 15 minutes. So should that be enough, do you think? Be back here at 1:45 for the flag raising ceremony. Is everybody happy with that? Okay, thank you. just restarting the live stream. Thank you, everybody, for agreeing to that brief interlude. I think it was a bit unconventional, but I think it was the right call. So thank you very much, and apologies for anybody who's had to hang around. So the next item on the agenda is the Pension Fund External Audit Plan, and I invite Nick to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is to present the internal audit plan, the external audit plan, sorry, for the Leicestershire Pension Fund covering the 24-25 financial year. It's one of two such plans, the other being the County Council's own accounts, and that plan was presented to this committee back in March this year, but this time this is the pension fund. I won't say any more at this stage. We've got Grant Patterson and Mary Wren here from our external auditors, Grant Thornton, so I'll hand over to them to go through the details.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, my name's Grant Patterson. I'm the engagement lead for the pension fund audit. I think most members might have met my colleague Avtar Sohal is the engagement lead for the County Council audit, and we split that because pension funds tend to be an area of specialism in terms of what goes into the financial statements. So what you have in front of you today is our proposed audit plan for the pension fund audit for 24-25. I won't go through it sort of page by page. There's some background at the beginning around the governance, I suppose, and challenges that all pension funds are going through at the moment. The government has also just recently announced last month its response to something called a Fit for Future consultation, and that will have other knock-on consequences around the governance of pension funds and elements like that. The County Council Fund isn't directly impacted. There are some pools, Access and Brunel, which effectively will have to transfer their assets out, but you're not in those pools, so you'll be not affected by that. So that will be something that will come through as we're going on around the governance of pension funds overall. But in terms of our approach to auditing the fund for this year, in terms of materiality, I'll take you to summarise on page 22 of the report. It's increased to £91.8 million this year, up from 69 million. We base that upon the net assets of the fund, so it's based, it's said equivalent to just over 1.4% of your gross investment assets. So the fund has a large number of assets. We use that as our benchmark because we feel that members of the fund, and I suppose the audit is directed at members of the pension fund, also yourselves who oversee the operation of the fund, because people want to see that the security of those assets that are then used to actually pay benefits into the future. So we base that when we say our materiality, that then drives how much work we will do based upon the valuation of those funds. So we've set that at £92 million this year. It's an increase on last year, and the two things that are driving that is we could go higher actually as your pension fund auditor. It is a well-run fund, and we can go up to 2% of your gross investment assets. But we also provide assurances to other councils that are employer councils that are within the fund, such as the county, but also the districts and the city council, and also the police who have members within the funds. And because of the nature of the work we do, we effectively have to sort of cap our materiality on the fund to make sure that any assurances we give don't affect those audits in terms of the materialities they've set. So we get a sort of cap of about just over 1.4%. But I would say we would be happy to go higher as your auditors of the pension fund, given the nature of the control environment, the governance arrangements you've got in place as a pension fund. So we've set that for the main headline materiality at 92 million. There's also a fund account. So effectively, you have a balance sheet that has all the assets on. You'll have a fund account that shows the income and expenditure in the year. So that's contributions in from employers and benefits payable to members, effectively, along with investment income and expenditure. Because of the nature of that fund, we set a slightly different, we set a lower materiality of that. And on that, we've gone for 10% of gross expenditure, which equates to £27 million this year because the expenditure has gone up slightly. So that's how we sort of set our materiality of the fund. In terms of auditors, we look at what we consider to be significant risks, i.e. the greatest risks of the accounts not being a true and fair view of the position of the fund at the end of March. One that we can't override is in the auditing standards. There's something called management override of controls. And that says we need to design effectively tests that we feel that if management wished to not show the accounts in a true and fair way, how could management do that? We have to assume the worst. Our testing has never found any that the management is doing that links into that, but we have to assume the worst. Having looked at the governance arrangements, where we think that would happen would be basically you would post journals to sort of move numbers around. Therefore, we land generally on management override of control in relation to looking at the journals of the funds that go through at the year end. So that is a significant risk to us, and as I say, that's a non-rebuttable significant risks. There are some that we can rebut. We look at sort of revenue recognition, income coming in and expenditure going out. We're satisfied that there aren't any significant risks of material misstatement within there, so we've not justified them to be significant risks for this audit. But the other two significant risks, and probably members won't be surprised, are around the valuation of assets, and it's the valuation of those assets that are hard to value. Generally in pension funds, you get level 1s, level 2s, level 3s. Level 1s are long equities. You can go to the Financial Times and the things will be traded on the stock exchange. You can quite easily pick a price for that and audit that. You'll get the level 2s, which are, well, we would use terms like pooled investment vehicles, but they've got some elements which might be having a price in a market that you can look at, and the level 3s where there's a much higher level of judgment used by the companies and people valuing them. And it's those level 3 assets that we look at. There'll be private equity elements like that you've heard of around that, and also directly held property, i.e. where there's a valuer. So they are of greater risk as in terms of valuations. It wouldn't take much of an assumption to be wrong for the valuation to be materially wrong. So that's where we focus our effort. So those are where we're going to focus our effort on in terms of the significant risk will be around those valuation of level 3 investments. In terms of, I suppose, the overall, in terms of the overall IT strategy as well, which is on page 34, just to say we will be sort of working alongside the county council auditors to review the IT systems that underlie the pension fund. So we were looking at the pensions administration system, Altair, which is the administration system the pension fund use, but also alongside that we'll be looking at the Oracle IT system that underpins the ledger. In terms of logistics, as I say, we're bringing this plan to this audit committee now. We're expecting draft accounts in the next few weeks, and then we conduct the audit over the summer. We do it parallel with the county council audit, and therefore what we're planning on doing is bringing the findings of our report on both the pension fund and the county council back to the November meeting, and that was when you'll get our audit findings report. In terms of that, in terms of audit fees, these are shown on page 39. The scale fee is set by PSAA following a competitive process. We're proposing at this point in time a slightly additional audit fee around investment property valuation, and that's primarily because we need to take on an expert. Wasn't part of the overall tender. We will be looking at that. You might just that the materiality has increased and it's getting closer to the directly held property level. So we will look at that when we get the financial statements in, but that's additional fee because we will need to employ our own expert in terms of gaining assurance on valuation of investment properties. And then there are independence elements there, the independence that we need to disclose to you at this point in time, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
The fees, there was an 11,000 overrun for last year's fees. Could you explain what they were for?
Right. So, yeah, in terms of the fee for last year, whilst we said that the fees are agreed with PSAA, there's certain work. ISA 315 is auditors speak for business processes, and that hadn't been incorporated by PSA into their tender process. So a lot of that inverted commas overrun was related to the work we would have to have done on that, and that was agreed with PSAA. And it's not just this fund; it's across our client base. Was the additional work that we need to do around under the auditing standards around business processes. And that's been baked into this year's fee now by PSAA. So it was a fee variation last year around that. And then in terms of the other ones were around the investment property expert, which was also part of that. And we also have some derivatives, which again have been incorporated by PSAA into the scale fee for this year. So those are the derivatives one again is using expert valuation for valuers to help us value the derivatives. So I think they're more like fee variations and overruns, but the ISA 315 is related to the auditing work we need to do under business processes. That was discussed with PSA, and as I say, it's across our whole client base, not just across Leicestershire. That's been incorporated into the fee for this year.
Thank you, Mr. Mew.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Very good report. I've read it quite specifically. I think the backstop issue shouldn't come into play, but it's just one of those reports where we've recognised what the government might do, might change the auditing rules, pensions, and it seems that it's not going to have a bigger impact for us as a local authority. However, there are been concerns, especially in the press, around local authority pension schemes being able to invest or being at risk. Can you just allay some of those fears to say actually this scheme isn't of that, and we shouldn't worry about it too much? On behalf of our
yeah, well, I'll try and break it down in terms of I suppose the audit backstop statutory regime that's now in place. Yes, the county's never had sort of delayed audits and elements like that, so it should not fall in the backstop. The backstop will come in February 2026 for those councils that audits aren't complete. Certainly as a firm, we are aiming to get audits complete hopefully by the end of December. So, and that's by November. I think in terms of the wider government's, as I say, policy of trying to get pension funds to engage with local economies and grow local economies, that's only just come out in the government's response. We'll have to wait and see what comes through the pensions bill. I think a lot of pension funds have actually been doing this already, but maybe not. But there will be a requirement on you to, as a pension fund, to consult with if it's a combined authority, a mayor, the local, to actually, as part of his investment strategy, to look to invest more locally. And so it will come through that investment strategy. Pension fund will always have a fiduciary duty, however, to its members to ensure, and there is some legal opinions been gathered by the Scheme Advisory Board. You can go to the website to make sure that, I suppose, it doesn't take undue financial risks. I mean, I think the key thing for running a pension fund is you need to have sufficient funds and resources available to meet pensions as they become due. So I think the government is creating that environment where pension funds are being asked to look at infrastructure and elements like that. So it will come down probably from here to the Pensions Committee and the Investment Subcommittee to see how that then links in to that. But we're already beginning to see ideas come forward. I'm aware of another one client down in the southeast where they're looking at temporary accommodation, and could the pension fund maybe set a vehicle up to help provide that. There are, I think the key thing around that is being make sure the governance is in place, and you've got appropriate checks and balances, and you're not taking undue risk within whatever the statutory environment. And that's the key thing around this. In local government, you're empowered to do what Parliament says you can do, unlike us as human beings who can do whatever we like and says there's a law against it. You have to have the powers to do that. And I think it's just being aware of that. There have been no problems with pension fund in the past. I'm sure the Pensions Committee and the Investment Subcommittee will work closely together with the local authorities around here to meet whatever they can. So I don't have any concerns at the moment, but we have to wait and see what comes through the pensions bill. So it's probably 12-18 months, but a lot of funds already are doing infrastructure locally anyway, and so I think they're already part way there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Any other questions? Any comments? The committee's asked to note the report. Is that agreed? Any against? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Moving on then to item 10, which is the annual Treasury Management Report. And again, I think Mick Mosh is going to present the report. Thank you.
Chair. So this report is a summary of the Council's Treasury management activity that has taken place over the course of the last financial year. It's a formal requirement of the Sitford Code of Practice to report by the end of September following the financial year end. After this meeting, the report will then go on to be presented to full Cabinet on the 15th of July. And obviously any comments that are or issues that are raised at today's meeting will be incorporated into what's presented to Cabinet. Treasury management reports are reported quarterly, so we'll do 3 quarterly reports and then 1 annual report. And the first one, obviously, that you're experiencing here is that annual report. The report starts on page 53 of your agenda pack, so I'm just going to go through and pick up some of the kind of key points to note from that report. So paragraph 3 gives a definition of what treasury management is, and essentially it's that ensuring that the funds held as cash and in investments are utilised as effectively as possible without subjecting the council to undue risks. And you'll see as we run through the rest of the report that that's kind of what the focus of the different aspects of the report takes into account. The economic background, starting on paragraph 5, in which treasury management operates, is heavily influenced by the economic circumstances. And as such, there's always a need to be mindful of potential issues that might impact, such as interest rate changes, inflation levels of government debt, etc. So each quarter, when Treasury Management reports are presented, the latest economic summary provided by our Treasury Management providers will be attached. Paragraphs 5 to 8 draw out the key issues from the most recent summary, notably that inflation rates continue to be volatile and are expected to rise potentially from current levels before reducing again during the next calendar year. And due to those inflation pressures persisting, and also sort of concerns around the government's potential borrowing requirements in the medium term, Bank of England interest rates, while they have fallen back from its recent high point, they're still higher than markets were forecasting for them to be about a year or so ago. And whilst this is potentially good news for treasury management purposes, because higher interest rates mean higher returns, this only goes a small way to offsetting the pressures on spend arising from the higher inflation rates that prevail. So paragraph 9 talks about debt rescheduling that took place during the last quarter. We'll come to that back to that a bit later as we look at the year's activity as a whole. And then paragraph 10 just confirms that the various treasury management activity that took place broadly stayed within the prudential indicators for the period in question. Paragraphs 11 and 12 summarise the position on the revenue income generated over the year, which eventually totaled £21.7 million. That's well in excess of the 14.2 million estimate that we built into the budget. And is largely due to the fact, as I've already mentioned, that interest rates stayed higher for longer, and also cash balances also being higher due to slippage on capital programme activity. And moving on to the section starting at paragraph 13, this looks back over the whole of the last financial year and notes that all treasury management was undertaken in line with the policy statement agreed on the 21st of February 2024, so prior to the start of the financial year. That was agreed by full council, and all transactions were done in line with the counterparty list provided by MUFG, who are our treasury management advisors. Some of you may have heard them referred to Link previously, which was what they're previously known as. All loans were repaid on time and with the requisite interest, as noted in paragraph 15. And then paragraph 16 mentions about the fact that it's necessary to inform the committee of any counterparty downgrading that happens during the period of an existing loan, such that it would breach the limit if a new loan was issued to that counterparty. And that such a situation did occur when MUFG downgraded its suggested holding for the NatWest Group following changes to the level of government shareholding in that bank. The limit was downgraded from 75 million to 35 million. LCC had £75 million invested with NatWest at the time across 5 different loans. Since that point, 45 million of this has subsequently been repaid with full interest, meaning that the outstanding holding at the end of the financial year was down to 35 million and back within the limits. Paragraphs 18 and 19, they focus on the reductions to the Bank of England base rate over the course of the financial year, which fell from 5.25% in April 24, so at the start of the year, down to 4.5% in March 25. And actually, they've fallen again since to 4.25% in May, although the most recent announcement was to hold them steady at that rate. So as such, returns on investment will reduce as new loans are taken out, because we're now having to take them out at lower interest rates than we would have been doing 6 months, a year ago, etc. Moving on to the debt position, paragraph 21. In total, 44.5 million of historic debt has been repaid during the financial year. The majority of this was voluntary repayment, because as gilt prices and hence the cost of government borrowing rose, this presented opportunities for us to offload some of our high interest rate debt. So whilst premiums were still required to be paid, these premiums are at a much lower level than we have seen in recent years. And whilst it's difficult to quantify exactly what the impact of that would be, because it's dependent on what happens with interest rates going forwards, based on what the forecast rates assessments are at the moment, at the time of repayment, it's estimated that these early repayments will save around 2.4 million a year over the remaining life of those debts. The table in paragraph 22 summarises the long-term outstanding debt position. There are 2 categories of debt shown in the table, one where the interest rate is fixed, and the other where the lender has an option to up the interest rate at certain points in the loan. However, when the lender, or if the lender decides to exercise that option, then we have the right to repay that amount without penalty at that point. So overall, the debt portfolio at year end totaled £175 million outstanding, and that was down from 219.5 million at the start of the year. And the average interest rate on that long-term debt for the portfolio sits at just under 6%. Paragraph 29 refers to the shortfall on the 24-25 capital programme at 83.6 million. And it's worth noting that that's down from £93 million a year ago. And it's expected that the council's buoyant balance sheet will allow this to be funded by borrowing against internal balances. And so no new external loans are foreseen at this point in time. But of course, as those funds are used up to fund the capital programme, it will mean that lower cash balances are available, and as such, lower levels of interest on returns on short-term investments going forwards. Paragraph 24 highlights that the overall investment portfolio, it does vary significantly through the year. It was 501 million at its highest and down to 408 million at its lowest, and finished at 415 million at the end of the financial year. It does vary for a number of factors, including the timing between when funding is received for government grants, etc., and when there's a need to pay out large sums of money around paydays, etc., like that. So it does vary through the year, but obviously there is the underlying reduction as a result of the fact that we will be using up funding to fund the capital programme. Moving on to the section about debt transactions, starting paragraph 25. This talks a bit more about the historic borrowing position, and it references the fact that at the start of the year, the council's position was over-borrowed by 18 million. This is swung to a 20 million under-borrowed position by the end of the year, largely due to that early repayment of debt that I mentioned earlier. And then the chart in paragraph 30 shows that the long-term debt position is unlikely to change significantly for at least 20 years, given the maturity profile of our long-term debt. Unless opportunities do arise for further debt to be repaid, but given that we've repaid quite a lot recently, it's unlikely that we'll probably be repaying any more significant amounts in the near future. Moving on to the section on investments from paragraph 31, you'll see that the average return for the financial year was 5.15%. That compares to the average Bank of England base rate of 4.95% and the average overnight rate of 4.9%. The comparison is also favourable over a longer time frame of 5 years, where the portfolio has earned an average of 2.63%. Obviously, earlier in those 5-year periods, interest rates were at a much lower level than they are now. And that 2.63% compares to an average base rate of 2.51% over the period and an overnight rate of 2.4%. Again, difficult to be precise, but that difference in terms of what we've achieved over and above the sort of base rate, I think it probably means about £2.6 million per year over the period. Then moving on to paragraph 34, this section that precedes this refers to short-term loans to financial institutions. The portfolio also holds some holdings in private debt and bank risk share. These are marginally riskier holdings that help to diversify the overall investment portfolio. Private debt is the name given to an asset class where money is loaned to companies that have not originated from a bank. Companies will choose to raise capital from these sources for a number of reasons, including the cost of the loan, availability of traditional banking credit, etc. And then the bank risk share is where the banking regulatory environment, capital has to be held as backing for loans that banks have provided. And if a bank wishes to increase its lending activity, it has to hold more regulatory capital. So an alternative is that they can then offload some of that risk to someone who can take it on their behalf. And that's what the bank risk share element does. So these holdings and their returns are over a longer time frame compared to the 6 to 12 months typically that we would put loans out to banks. And you'll see from the table in paragraph 35 that there are 4 separate funds which overall have had 65 million invested in them. Roughly half of this capital has now been returned, so 32.7 remains invested. And it's worth noting that this remaining investment has a net asset value at the moment of 35.8 million. So basically 3 million higher. As well as the capital value appreciation, you'll also see that the various income returns have been received from 3 out of the 4 funds, 11.2 million in total. And overall, this represents a return of around 8.5%. So that was all I was going to say, Chair. I realise there's a lot of different aspects to that report and there's probably quite a lot to take in, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you ever so much for that presentation. Are there any questions or comments from members? Mr. Mayor?
Cheers, thank you, Chair. I'll have to leave after this committee, this item, because I've got another meeting. But just to say that I've read through this report, it's very pleasing that we've made £7.5 million extra on our investment income. But obviously the inflation rate is higher. But because interest rates are long or higher than forecast, does that mean that this year's investment strategy going forward will have a little bit more money to play with? So that's one thing. And I know all in a bigger budget, it's probably not that much, but even a few million more is welcome. And the second thing is that we're obviously lending out to all these organisations, and we have to change things mid-year in the review. Which is welcome, but sometimes we need more earlier foresight to say, actually, we've done this and the reason and explanations instead of in the annual review. So my question is, obviously, I'm new to this committee this time round. Do we get an update midway through? So just to be reassured that if things were to change, say a lender fell off the radar or for whatever reason was at risk. My final question is obviously world turmoil, how that will impact our investment and where and who we lend our money to. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of the kind of interest rates remaining higher for longer in isolation, yes, that will potentially mean that we will get more revenue income on the returns on those investments over the course of the year, which in isolation is good news. But really what's happening is the reason interest rates are high for longer is just because inflation has been harder to manage. And if inflation is harder to manage, that means that all of our services that we're providing are subject to those inflation pressures. And the inflation pressures typically would dwarf what extra returns we can get on any investments that we hold. So although in isolation it looks good news, the fact that inflation rates are holding on higher for longer is actually bad news for the authority as a whole. So yeah, we would rather inflation came down and interest rates came down, I think. I mean, then in terms of the kind of issues with what's happening with certain bodies in the year, so we get regularly, I mean, pretty much daily, we will get a list from our Treasury Management Advisors, which tells us what the latest position is on all the potential counterparties available for us to invest in. So every time we make a decision, we will look at what the latest advice is from those Treasury Management Advisors and make sure that any loan that we're planning to make is still within the limits in terms of how much we can lend to an individual institution, the banks from a certain country, and also the time limits that we can put those in for. Inevitably, there will be things where they change after we've made loans, and that was what I was referring to earlier. Something changed retrospectively, but obviously we can't do anything about that. All we can do is make sure that when we make a loan, we make it in line with what the latest position is. And then in terms of kind of getting a feeling as you move through the year, the 3 monthly or the quarterly return reports that we bring to this committee will talk about the sort of latest position, and if there have been any breaches or any changes, significant changes to a particular institution or particular country's kind of financial standing, etc. We will report it at that point. So yes, there will be regular reports through the course of the year.
Thank you for that. Any further questions or comments? Yeah, Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Chair. With regards to the NatWest breach, was that resolved in an acceptable time frame, and did it highlight any potential risks going forward?
Well, again, when the money was lent to them, the amount that was recommended by the Treasury Management Advisors was up to £75 million. It was when the government then sold off some of its shares to NatWest that the reaction by the Treasury Management Advisors was to downgrade the maximum amount to lend to NatWest. But again, it was all retrospective. So clearly what we wouldn't be doing is loaning any more money to NatWest until we got down back below the new credit rating, which was a 35 million, which had happened by the end of the financial year because £45 million of those loans had been repaid. So I don't think it provides any risks or anything to consider other than the fact that we just need to be mindful that every time we take out a new transaction, it's in line with the current recommendations that our Treasury management providers have around that institution at the time we make that loan. We get these all the time. It's happened quite a lot. There's been various, I seem to remember, like the Chase Brothers Bank, we had 6 months loans out with them and they were then downgraded to 100 days, for example. All the money gets returned, but obviously we just have to kind of react retrospectively to that sort of situation. Therefore, we would not be putting any more 6-month loans out to Close Brothers while they were down to 100 days. Recommendation by Treasury Management Advisors. So it does happen. This can't really avoid it there very much.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? So the committee is asked to note the contents of the annual report for 24-25 and it will be submitted to Cabinet for consideration at its meeting on the 15th of July. I'm happy to move this recommendation. Is that seconded? Mr. Mayor, is that agreed? Any against? No, that's carried. Thank you very much. So we now move on to item 11, which is the Internal Audit Service Annual Report, and I'll invite Neil Jones to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Just before I start this report, I just wanted to explain, cover a number of other functions. So that's why I've got so many reports on here today. And sitting at the back on the first row, from left to right, I've got Matt Davis, who's an audit manager. So he's very involved in all these reports. Scott Brownlow and Lynn Woolhouse, who are both senior auditors, and Scott does a lot of work on the counter audit report, which is on later, and Lynn also on the AGS, which is on later. So that's just important. You get to know these people if they attend committee as well. So internal audit annual report. So the internal audit function it's a statutory function. for members who don't know that. So in the accounts and audit regulations, the Chief Financial Officer, Declan, has to have by law an internal audit function. Okay, and then I have to, as part of internal audit standards, which I abide to, have to present an annual report to the relevant committee, this committee. So those standards currently, for the last year's report 24-25 with the public sector internal audit standards, they've now changed from the 1st of April. So next year I'll be reporting under the government internal audit standards. Okay. Page 66, just what that annual report must include from these current standards. So I think the most important of that is my opinion on the overall effectiveness of the control environment. Okay, and for the members who are in here earlier on, I tend to dwell on that term, control environment. So it's the framework of governance, risk management and internal control. So I'll be using that quite a lot. There are some other elements in terms of reporting performance and things like that, which are in the report. So the actual report, which I'll come back to in a minute, is in the appendix, but I want to just concentrate on that opinion first. So if I can ask you to go to page 78, members, to page 78, and that is a summary of how I begin to build up an opinion on the control environment. And it's what I class as a macro assurance opinion. So it's taking account of not just internal audit work, but a lot of other things that you can use as head of internal audit to build up that wider picture. So I take account of all the results of all the audits we've done, and then, for instance, the work and attendance at this committee and how this committee engages with the internal audit function and other functions. I then can take assurances from other providers, such as our colleagues here from external audit, and we have some work done for us by Nottingham City Council internal audit. So building all those up together, I then can create an opinion on the overall control environment. I've done that again for this year, and that is to be found on page, 682. So what I do is I provide a brief rationale and then a summary opinion at the bottom. So my opinion, I'll state it here now, is that reasonable assurance is given that the control environment has remained overall adequate and effective during 24-25. Doesn't sound very exciting, and people may think, why are you using the word reasonable? And that is because you have to caveat this. You can't give a substantial opinion because there could be something that our work hasn't covered or something that may come around. It's a strong opinion. It's not a limited assurance opinion where some organisations have found significant issues. So that is my overall opinion for this year. So I did mention the appendix, which I think is starting at page 65, is at the report itself. So it's a bit further on than that, 69. So that covers the opinion again. It then covers off a range of performance information. It also gives assurance that we've conformed to standards again last year. Okay, and then finally back to the main cover report, and they're covered in paragraph 10 of the main cover report, which is on page 67. Just some headlines. So the opinion was remained positive for the last year. Most of our assurance audits, which is where we can gain a lot of evidence and really look at the controls on that. So most of those individually created a substantial assurance rating, which was good. Anywhere there's lesser assurances on those, work proactively with management to make sure things are put right, and that works really well. You'll get to see more reports on progress-free PAM throughout the year. We did a similar number of audits, and most work was completed by the date of this report, which is always encouraging. A relatively small carryover. That's audit. Unlike our colleagues here, their audit year stops on a certain date. Ours doesn't. It rolls over a little bit. We managed to continue to be developed and trained. We had very good staff attendance over the year, which was excellent, and our customer satisfaction remained positive. So once again, I'm reporting a good opinion for the year, and that's my annual report. Thanks, Joe. Take any questions.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you to the other members of staff who have joined us for the meeting today. Any questions or comments for Neil? Yes, Mr. Innes.
I'm just interested in the process. Do you rotate people looking at different aspects of the the auditing? So you look at different areas, or is it always the same people that look at the same areas?
Yeah, we're relatively small in number at the moment, so there's more of a chance that people would do the same audit, but we always look to rotate and give staff the development and experience to do it and look at it with a fresh pair of eyes. So we've got some new staff coming in on board fairly shortly, so that will provide us a new sort of impetus in terms of looking at these audits in a different way.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Comments? Yeah, Mr. Crook.
Thank you, Chair. Is the global internal audit standards significantly different to what we're used to? Is there any curveballs to expect?
Yeah, thank you. I will be bringing papers to the September committee on the global standards. So the public sector standard, which we've worked with for a few years, were a condensed set of those global standards. And I think what CIPFA, who wrote those standards originally, was thinking was it just might as well go with the global ones, and then they've got sort of bolt-on little papers that we have to abide by. So we will still retain the public sector ethos, and there'll be things that this committee will have to sign. So I'll still have to do an annual report. I will still have to report it through to the AGS, which are public sector or certainly local government ethos for those sector standards. And then there'll be a new responsibility for the committee. And again, this has got lost in the global standards about what does a local government audit committee or corporate governance committee need to be, giving assurance to its council on. So there is a code of practice for the governance of internal audit in local government. So I'll be explaining that paper at the September. That's a new responsibility for this committee.
Thank you for that. Any further questions or comments? No? Oh, sorry. Yes, Mrs. Knight, sorry.
Hi there. You say you've recruiting, so you're filling your unfulfilled vacancies. Are they full now?
We've come on the cusp of doing this really. So we're having some short-term vacancy, just short-term agency to see us through periods until we redesign our service. So it's just about to happen. Matt and his other colleague were sorting that out last week while I had a bit of leave.
Okay, and when your unfulfilled vacancies are full, hopefully, will you be increasing the provision of internal auditing to other organisations?
Unlikely. I think we have done that in the past. So unless there are any major changes at LGR, local government reorganisation, I think that's unlikely. We do currently provide to ESPO, we provide to the fire service. So we're fairly stretched, if you like, in terms of that. And we have provided in the past to other organisations, but that's sort of slimmed down a little now.
Thank you very much. No further hands up, so therefore the committee is asked to note the Internal Audit Service report, and a copy will be circulated to all the members of the council for information. I'm happy to move that. Is that seconded? Mr. Bulls, all agreed? Excellent, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. So then we move on to item 12, which is the draft annual governance statement 2024-25. I think that's Neil again.
Okay, so this is one of those additional requirements, and again this is a statutory requirement, the annual governance statement, again through the accounts and audit regulations. So the requirement to do an annual governance statement, and that sits alongside the statement of accounts, which will be going in draft and posted on the internet at the end of June. So it is a key governance document, and it is reviewed by our colleagues here to the right in terms of their work on value for money, especially their governance part of the value for money arrangements. In the county council, it covers off our own governance arrangements and also those of what we class as significant group entities. I've mentioned ESPO, we've got our East Midlands Shared Service, and a number of others are covered off in the statement itself. I mean, it is important for the committee to, and I understand it's a new committee, so finding its feet in terms of what governance arrangements are here, but eventually you will begin to see that the statement contains a lot of the information on the reports you get here. So it will give a bigger picture, probably the wrong time to bring this now, but bigger picture in terms of how the committee sees the governance arrangements for the county council. The approach to building the governance statement hasn't really changed for a couple of years now. So what we do, we get all of our Lynn mentioned earlier on, gets a lot of the legwork and gets all of our managers to self-assess their own departmental arrangements against the framework. So there is a set framework so that we get consistency amongst that. We then review that. We have a senior officer group with a monitoring officer and Declan as the chief financial officer and other range of groups to make sure that that is an accurate picture what we know is governance in here. We then, as that senior officer group looks to say, okay, we may have some things to report in terms of significant governance issues. I've always been think we've been very open in terms of an organisation doing that. So we have this year, we followed the set criteria that we've got in place and brought 2 significant governance issues which are in the report. We will provide updates on those issues in terms of what officers have done to mitigate those risks going forward. So the AGS in itself is a backward-looking document, but it does stay open from now until the accounts are finally audited and signed off, and that gives an opportunity, if you like, for anything that was missed in terms of reviewing those significant governance issues to be reflected upon and added in. So it remains open for that time being. And whilst it is looking back, it does look forward. So in terms of our own AGS, there's quite a lot of future challenges in terms of government policy on the rise and also service changes. So in the statement itself, in pages 124 to 127, there's a lot of information in there in terms of what's around the corner. And then finally, when we do our self-assessment, there is an opportunity to say, yeah, we perhaps need to improve a little bit in those areas. So in the back end of the statement at pages 128 to 130, there's just a list of some improvement areas which I have a responsibility to maintain that they are being actually achieved. That's all I'd like to say.
Thank you, Neil. Any questions or comments on this one, please? No. So moving on to the recommendation, the committee is asked to consider the draft annual governance statement and to note that there are 2 significant governance issues reported in the draft governance statement, and note that the draft governance statement, which may be subject to change as required by the Code of Practice on Local Authority Accounting, has been prepared in accordance with best practice. I'm happy to move this recommendation. Is that seconded? Mr. Innes, all agreed? It's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. So we now move on to the risk management update, and I think there's going to be a presentation. I'll allow the officers who are doing the presentation to introduce themselves when they come. I think we're just going to have a second or two just to change seats around.
Right, Chair. I think Tim, I don't know how many's coming in. Tim, replacing just while they're making their way up though. I did send. So this is the second presentation following an earlier one by Manish, who was here. Sorry, no, it was his colleague who was here in January on cybersecurity risk and how we manage cybersecurity. I did send that out to members last week, so it'll be in your members portal or on an email from me. So we're not going to concentrate on that specific today. We're just going to move forward and say, so the cyber was on how do we protect against a cyber attack. This one is towards the end of it, if we do get one, how will that be managed? Thank you.
So whenever you're ready, gentlemen. Thank you.
Senior Resilience Officer. Sorry about that. Forgot that a little bit. Senior Resilience Officer for the Council's Resilience and Business Continuity team. My boss next to me, Zafar Salim, Assistant Chief Exec, and then asked Manish, Head of Technology, to come forward as well, because Manish was involved in the original presentation back in, I think it was February time, I believe, Manish. Do you want to just quick update on that, or a quick brief on that, Manish? Just that presentation.
John Manish, so people.
Apologies. Thank you, Chair. So the cyber presentation that was presented in February was basically to provide and give reassurance that there are a number of processes and practices in place across Leicestershire County Council's IT team, and it explains the process around NIST, which was typically an approach that we use to ensure that we're identifying, we're detecting, protecting, and implementing solutions and services to recover in the event of a cyber attack or any other IT related issue. And it went through a series of different controls and techniques that we're deploying within the technology infrastructure, but also policy and practice that we're embedding within the team across the IT and digital services. And it talks about a number of technologies in particular that we've invested in over the recent years that gives us that capability to have greater visibility of what's going on within the network, within the infrastructure, and allows us to react and repair, recover, and monitor vulnerabilities across the infrastructure, inside threats and outside threats. So it's just to set the scene with regards to where we are with the cyber side of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Manish. So what I was asked to do was to just come and do a very short presentation how cyber and business continuity planning actually merge together in terms of planning. It's one of the biggest risks, I think, identified across both the private and public sector, if not the biggest risk. Just a bit of background to business continuity planning. It is a requirement under the Civil Contingencies Act. All Category 1 responders, which are local authorities are part of, must undertake adequate business continuity management and also provide advice. It's one of the few that actually sits with local authorities under the Civil Contingencies Act. Provide advice to outside business and the voluntary sector in particular about business continuity management, just to provide that advice. Secondly, May of last year, the council published its latest business continuity management policy, firmly aligning business continuity with international standard 22301, which is the standard that's recommended for business continuity planning within the public sector. And therefore, we've had a knock-on effect in terms of the work that we've been doing with individuals, teams, all the way up to department management teams as well. So that gives you just a little bit of a background of where we are. Also, on top of that, I took over the role as a senior in April of last year. We had the published policy going out, as I say, in May, and then I undertook an internal review. But we also were informed by Neil's team that we were going to be part of an internal audit that started in November, which thankfully, in essence, underpinned everything I think we'd found within the review. And we're moving on, and that's why the first two slides relate to where we're going with business continuity management planning, and the last three relate to, in particular, ITC and how that sits within business continuity. So, ongoing business continuity management work, critical service plans. Now, these are internal plans to the county. These are our own departments and teams. Now, critical service with two tiers that we use. Tier 1 really impacts on the community, health, safety and welfare and security of the community and the environment. So effectively, if we were to fail to deliver a service, then that could have a detrimental effect to a member of the community, indeed all communities. So what we're doing, there's 41 plans between the 6 teams, sorry, 42 tier 1 plans across the 6 teams, not including the department management team plans. They sit above that. We're going to create an ongoing procedure once we've done this review of those plans to assist in levels of assurance back to the council, to yourselves, and indeed the community. And then we saw there was a need through our own review and also the internal audit that we needed to get closer to the teams of the plans to enable them to get a full understanding of business continuity management and planning. Something was a little bit historical. It was basically the plans were sent out. The teams did the plans, stored them on what we call a secure system, Resilience Direct, that they can get access from anywhere from if they need to in the event of an IT outage. And it was very much an ad hoc by exception procedure as opposed to a more formalised procedure. So we were working towards that. And we also know we've had quite a changeover in staff over the last few years, and in particular plan owners. And there was, as confirmed by the audit, there was an issue around people's understanding of business continuity management. Now, there are only 2 business continuity officers for the whole of the council, and they both work in my area. Governance and review, another area that was again picked up through the internal audit, but also by our own internal review. And so far, my boss, we've had a number of conversations over the review and governance of the planning process per se. So now there are quarterly reports generated for our resilience planning group, which is our tactical level group that sit within the council looking at resilience planning and business continuity management. So far as the chair, we have a number of assistant directors and heads of service on that particular group. So they will get a report now, the first one being in July, on where we are with those 42 plans and indeed other plans. We're looking at what we call a two-factor assurance assessment in a sense. So first and foremost, the business continuity officers will undertake what's called an ISO capability assessment to ensure that it meets the relevant sections of the ISO or the international standard. And the second part, the most important part, is the testing of the plans. That's a team responsibility, and we need to record that. And only once we've got that and the test proves that the plan works in a testing environment would we give it a firm assurance as such. So it's a two-factor assurance. One of the things that Declan has asked me to also look at is how do we validate the validation in a sense. So I'm coming from fire service. We're in a position where we had a number of people trained within the organisation to undertake proper validation of exercise in that, making sure that it meets the right requirements, in particular for the international standard. And it would raise awareness of BC planning, the part they played during an incident, and then we would then make a copy of the previous year's planning exercise, and that would come to this committee on an annual basis. Moving on to IT then. So a couple of areas that I don't intend to dwell too much on this. There is a little bit of confusion in some quarters. I think Manny should probably agree with this, between what's called disaster recovery and business continuity. So business continuity is purely about consequence management. If we were to lose the site, if we were to lose our people, if we were to lose IT, how would we carry on providing our service until such time as we were back into a normal situation? Disaster recovery is predominantly about the IT systems, and more in Manish's area than mine is how do we recover those systems. We've just done a recent run of exercises at sort of RPG level, tactical level, and most people are fairly aware of this. But one of the two areas that people were a little bit struggling with was how long it would take systems to be brought back online. So they might be told that it would take 4 days. That will only ever be a target. It could take 4 weeks. So they've got to plan appropriately. And secondly, about data loss. So if we had a particular issue, particularly a cyber incident, there could be a considerable amount of data loss in between the point from when the system went down to when the system comes back out, and the impacts on their service. How we go about it? So the BC plans, so as we see, 42 tier 1 plans. Consequence management contain a section on contingency arrangements, and it's section 6 of the BC plan take. And part of that is relating to IT. Loss of IT systems, loss of telephony, and loss of critical information, including data. And this is where individual teams will then detail their response to that sort of scenario. Now, we can't have a standard response because not everything's even across all the teams, across all 6. So team plans are owned by the plan owners, and it's for them to start to fill that information with advice from ourselves. And as it says on that for, I think it's the 4th bullet point, the decision hours this is achieved is down to individual teams and at department management team level. Now, department management team plans are an amalgamation of the plans that sit below them and how the department management team would deal with an IT outage. And as part of the reviewing process, the teams are encouraged to get the relevant information, particularly in this case from Manish's team. And this is where it plays back into the first 2 slides. Is myself and Manish sit on our disaster recovery steering group, and Manish yourself, you want quite a bit of input into that element of when we start to do it with individual teams about the IT, because IT is one of the biggest issues, of course, within all our teams and how we maintain that. And we want the people to get the advice on that direct from the people that are what we call the subject matter experts. Finally, in the event of an IT outage, and it's not always a cyber situation, we had a recent issue at Nottingham City Council where they had a fire on the roof of their building which knocked their IT system out. Had a knock-on effect to Leicestershire County Council because they do some of our work, and we're doing some work with them moving forward. We have an incident management plan that sits within my area, the resilience, and one of the areas, it has a flow chart and it talks about a team that operates its business continuity plan, then informs what we call our on-call senior manager. So we have an on-call senior manager at the highest level and above that operate 24/7. We have two. We have an on-call and a deputy on-call senior manager, and they're informed. Now that manager will then take advice on what they need to do, and if it's a big implication, because it could be hitting more than one team because there are shared services, do we need to call the resilience planning group back together in its operational mode to start to assist that? In the event of a large IT outage, something that was suffered with the Leicester City Council recently in the last 18 months, then clearly RPG would need to sit in person, and indeed the corporate management group, which is the corporate management team role when it's in a major incident, would be sitting as well. If it was beyond Leicestershire County Council, we have something called the Resilient Partnership, which is a shared emergency planning service between all local authorities. And then we have what's called the Local Resilience Forum. Again, a statutory requirement under the Civil Contingencies Act would come together and start to manage that process as best they could at that particular time. That's as much as a proposed, Chair. If anybody's got any questions.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Any questions or comments on the presentation? Mr. Poland.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting. You mentioned about the cyber incident that Leicester City suffered earlier this year. Are there any sort of lessons that we can learn from that? Is there anything sort of that's relevant to us from their experience to save us from the same fate?
Not at the moment. Managed to want to come in on that.
Yeah, so we've had a couple of briefings from the city following their incident. In fact, it was last year now, so some time has passed. But in terms of the issue that they suffered, we are aware of the technical details regarding that issue, and we have definitely taken notes on the technical platforms that were affected by their issue. And we are, alongside some of the things that Tim mentioned around business continuity planning, alongside that, we are doing a lot of disaster recovery testing in an isolated environment to prove that we have got the right documentation, the right processes and practices to be able to recover technical systems. So in the event of what happened to City Council, if we went through a similar activity or similar scenario-based tabletop exercise, it is in fact one of the things that we are tabletopping and documenting. So yes, we have absolutely learned quite a few lessons. We have put some additional controls in place based on some of the feedback that we had from City as well.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Innes.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report. I'm interested in the frequency of testing of the business continuity. You mentioned high turnover of staff. And in my experience in business continuity takes a very low emphasis in a department. Is it tested regularly?
My understanding is yes. It's one of the areas that we need to get better on, I think, in being able to report that. Hence, one of the reasons we're now going to report this through RPG. So what they'll get on a quarterly basis at RPG is a list of the plans, a list of how many of our ISO capability assessment, a list of the plans that have been tested that year. Testing generally is by exercise. That might be small scale, that might be large scale. So we did some testing, as I say, I talked in the presentation about a series of small exercises, what we call JESIC bite-size exercises, were run from about, I think it was September of last year through to April of this year, about 6 exercises, each about 2 hours, which was predominantly around, in fact, it wasn't just predominantly, it was around no IT being available. When you come into work on a Monday morning, we've had a major attack. The chief exec has agreed to take IT down, which is very similar to what happened in Leicester City, prevent it spreading elsewhere. and what you're going to do with the consequence management. And Manish provided a very good SME for us, subject matter expert. It gave information about turn it into layman's terms, shall we say, some of the terminology. And I think the two areas, as I said before, that they were concerned about was data loss and this bit about when they expect to get the IT back up. So I understand that most teams test their plans regularly. At the moment, I'm not able to put myself in a position where I could report on that, but from July we should be able to do that.
Thanks, Chair. I'm hearing a lot of should and maybe, and they should do this, or we expect them to do that. Is this not mandatory, or is there not a plan that the departmental heads should follow?
At the moment, I would say no, but moving on from July, it will become mandatory. It'll be reported to RPG and it'll be reported to CMT as well. So they'll get the paperwork at the next available CMT. And then the questions are asked, because we've got the heads of service and the assistant directors that sit in RPG, as to why this is not happening. So it's really a big revisit to the old business continuity management system and planning, and then getting something and being a lot more formal than what we've been before, because I think it's been a little bit ad hoc, and it's also been more by exception when there's been a problem, rather than actually keeping an eye on it. So that will move forward. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, it tends to be human nature. As people assume nothing going to happen, but the reality is, if we're honest, in terms of a cyber attack, is a question of when, not if. And there is a saying: we have to be lucky 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. A hacker only has to be lucky once, and they are algorithms. For some people, this is their job. They're just attacking every public sector organisation. I mean, if we think about it, recently Marks and Spencers, who would have thought? And then there was other big retail as well, Co-op. So it's the damage to reputation, but also it's the ICT costs later on, the loss of data. And clearly, we're not a retail environment, but we provide adult social services, children's social services, mental health services, linked to other provision, road safety issues. Everything is, as well as our financial systems as well. So clearly, most public sector organisations potentially have got a lot of data on a lot of people, including significant data, everything about them, not just the email addresses, and that means that is potentially a source of ransom. So we have to make sure that the systems are in place and prepare for when it possibly could happen. Certainly City Council, Nottingham Council, other councils, it has happened within recent memory.
Chair, if I may, just to finish on, and apologies for using the term should, could, it will. But there's an element of almost hearts and minds in this, getting people on board with it. And that's where it becomes difficult. And the responsibility for the plans to be completed, tested, actually sit with line management, not necessarily with myself or the RPG. That's where it gets picked up and the questions should be asked. So apologies on that.
Thank you for that. Mr. Powland.
Thank you. Obviously, we've seen, as you said, in terms of Marks and Spencers and others, the sort of attacks are becoming more sophisticated, more common. But obviously, one thing that we've got to be very aware of, I guess, is attacks from state actors as well, especially in the current sort of environment. With that in mind, do we get support from national government or any national agencies in terms of defending from those sorts of attacks, which potentially is going to be the top end of sophistication?
Yeah, I think the minister on the television only yesterday was saying that they're seeing a lot more increases by Iran trying to do this exact sort of things, as well as the other actors, as we know, Russia and China and the rest of them.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Barron, the National Cyber Security Centre is there for public sector organisations to take advice from. It's not a paid-for arrangement. They provide best practice and a set of tools and a toolkit essentially for local government organisations to adopt best practice in their infrastructures and IT systems. So we have those on hand. We also have paid for services through security companies as what they term a retainer service. So in the event that something happens, as aforementioned, it's a matter of when, not if. If it does happen, then we can call upon these organizations to give us that support, and they do forensic analysis and all of those types of things. But to give assurance, we on an annual basis follow public sector network compliance, which is a Cabinet Office monitored a compliance mechanism that allows us to follow a strict regime around adopting best practice security, patching, and various security controls across the infrastructure. So whilst there's not a plethora of things that we have to our disposal, we've got National Cyber Security Centre, the NCSC, that are there, that give us the right tools, the right advice, and the right platform to develop our security standards against.
Mrs. Knight.
Just a quick one from me. What preventative measures have you got in place? Because I know the easiest way for them to get in is a spam email with a link in, and somebody owns that link and they're in.
Thank you. So as well as the technical controls, we're only as good as the advice that we give to our members of staff. So we are, there's currently a comms campaign going across the organisation that tells them and advises them not to click on links. There are technical controls in to prepare, prevent those emails from getting through to people's inboxes. But there's always one that gets through. It might be just from a standard Gmail account, and we're not going to be able to block all emails from Gmail accounts. So there's education, there's mandatory training in place for all members of staff that they have to do on an annual basis, and that talks them through the things that they should and shouldn't do. So that's one element, and then obviously a number of technical controls that we adopt and implement that help us protect and put these preventative controls in. So the cyber presentation that was done in February talks at a high level through some of the control that we have in place, technically wise on the infrastructure. Emails is just one of those things, but it's obviously probably the most important business tool that we use in the organisation. So that is an area that we focus on quite heavily. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Logan.
Hello. I'm an independent member, so forgive me if I ask inappropriate questions. You said you've got 42 sort of plans at a sort of operational level. How much, and then there's a departmental plan that sort of goes over the top of that, but how much are they integrated so that you avoid duplication of effort and miscommunication when time and energy is focused on the critical incident rather than people looking at a plan?
Yeah, so it's a good question. It was a question that was raised by CMT when I took a similar presentation back in April by the chief exec. I suspect we have a number of plans that are very similar, if not the same, just different teams. So what I've done in the short term is I've met with all the directors to go through the process, because the CMT presentation was a abridged version of what was gone to RPG the day before. And one of the things they're starting to look at each of the departments is where, reviewing those plans and seeing if the inputs and outputs are the same, and therefore instead of having 5 different plans, one for 5 different teams, and ensuring through the on-call senior manager, if there's any communications in an incident, that's picked up by the relevant management within the teams. So 42 tier 1 plans, there are 34 tier 2 plans. Tier 2 critical plans are those plans that would have a direct impact on the council in terms of legality, reputation and damages. That's a slightly lower tier. You can argue that all tier 1s are tier by virtue of the fact of what they are in tier 2s. We also then have team plans, and we also then have a great raft of external plans, which are critical organisations that provide critical services on our behalf, of which we're accountable for. So there's a considerable amount of work there. In terms of control within an incident, That's why one of the issues is, one of the points on the incident management plan is we convene a resilience planning group meeting in its operational sense with the relevant heads of service and department heads, assistant directors, so that that element of communication is passing between the teams.
Okay, so I suppose my question is, these things are highly emotional and very critical at a moment in time, and evidence suggests that all plans go out the window the minute something like that happens. People start running around trying to deal with the issues. That can cause a lot of confusion. How is that tested?
That's tested by, we can only test the plans as they are. And we can then do the Jessup Biosize exercise planning that I've talked about earlier, where we test it across the organisation. Now, any plan at the end of the day is a start point, whether it be a resilience plan or whether it be a business continuity. It's a start point, and it's a process where you approach what's happening in an orderly fashion, in a sense, and follow a number of steps to get you moving. How the incident then changes dependent on what you've got in front of you is down to the managers to sort of manage. But the process is really to get people together to start operating that plan. So if we had an IT outage in particular, we would be calling in the relevant management teams to start discussing how do they still maintain their level of business in critical sense, and how long can they do that for before they need to raise it to another level. Now, my other side of the team is resilience. So we work as part of the Resilience Partnership, which is all the other local authorities, as well as the Local Resilience Forum, which is all the category one. So that's all your blue lights, the NHS, and we meet on a regular basis in an incident. We call them tactical coordinating groups. And then we also have a strategic coordinating group, which is chief execs. And these are the areas that are discussed. And media and comms, and that's both internally, comms to yourselves as members, and also comms to the community, are controlled through those groups.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, thank you.
It might be, if I just illustrate with a simple example, it's what typically happens with each team. They'll have a methodology which they've agreed in advance of how they're going to contact their staff. Now, in most cases, it's WhatsApp through a council device rather than some other way. And within that context, they'll have a default. What happens if the IT goes out? What happens if there's a flood in a particular area? And there'll be a default to you carry on doing the following, or the default is you will have to come into County Hall, or the default is you go to the nearest district office. Or if you're, for example, adult social services and you've got a route, you work on the basis that you'll carry on going to do your assignment until told otherwise. So there's always a default, what would happen if? And that's how most teams would operate. And then, but I think what the point you raised earlier is when it gets to director level and CMT level, they're looking across and see, is there a way of streamlining this? Are there some common messages? And they're the sort of things that Manish and Tim are talking about. So we're introducing two-factor authorization. So it controls how people access their computers or their IT. We don't allow anyone to use memory sticks, for example, and then there's other things we stop. So all of those combination of matters should ensure that we're secure as best we can within the resources that are available.
Thank you very much. I think that's all the questions. I'm conscious of time. So we are now moving back onto the main report agenda, pages 131 to 146. Thank you very much, guys, for the presentation. And I invite Neil to comment on the report.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So this is just it's a routine report really that I bring to each committee, and it advises on our corporate risks. I did send members the policy and strategy last week to give them a bit more background in terms of this process. So this is a fairly short report this time around. There's only been one additional risk added. There's been nothing really taken off the register this time around. And then there is a short update on what we're classing currently as an emerging risk or emerging opportunity around local government reorganisation. So that's in the main report itself. And then the appendix I obtain from each of those risk owners an update to bring to the committee, so that's as up to date as it possibly can be from a couple of weeks back. So I'll just take any questions if members have any on those.
Thank you, Neil. Any questions? Yes, Mr. Grimes.
Yeah, thanks, thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Neil. You've heard me talk about sending on a few occasions, Neil. Risk 1.6 on page 135 about the deficit on the high needs block. It says still awaiting information from the DFE on the statutory override. Would you have any update on that?
I saw something just before the committee in public finance. Declan, did you see that? They've extended it.
Yeah, they've just kicked the can down the road, basically. So we've been told that we can keep it off balance sheet for another couple of years, and there's going to be the reforms. So until we know what the reforms are going to be, we don't really know what they're going to do. But until that time, it has a detrimental impact. So we've got a cash flow still.
Mr. Poland.
Thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions here. There's a bit from Mr. David Page, who obviously couldn't be here today with us, about this. So he said he's got a particular interest in sort of risk management and that sort of what he does for his living. So with those in mind, I'll just read the points he's made. He says, I want to see a proper summary by department of outstanding risks in traffic light form. Several weeks ago, I sent Declan a copy of something they have in Welland Park Academy, and it would be a useful addition because it also includes which area of the council is accountable for each risk overall, and allows us to track changes from one meeting to the next. So maybe that's something you could take with him offline. And the second one he's asked is, what's not clear is which risks have become issues. A risk, as you know, a risk is something that could happen, and an issue is something that has happened. Which issues are we now dealing with as a council operationally that were originally managed as risks, and how many issues were never risks? This would really show the reality of our dynamic world. Let's start that sentence again. This would show the reality of our dynamic world and is a good indicator of our coping ability as an organisation. So I read those because risk management is not my speciality.
No, I mean, firstly, Gemma, can we get those from Mr. Poland? So I've got the detail. I think just in answer to the what did you say? Something been sent to Declan? I mean, I can pick up on that and have a look to see what it was on about. The idea of
just on that, there was sent through, but there was no request for any response or information. So.
Right. Yeah, fine. I mean, the idea of this paper is to bring to the committee. So our risk management structure, like most places, is a tiered upwards arrangement, so that this committee sees the most important risks to it, and that's why we don't bring a lot of. Many years back, we used to bring a lot of information that was just too much for members to get their heads around, sort of thing. So, but I will take in account of what the question is, and then the second question, which went very long, I've sort of lost train of thought.
Yeah. So the second one he's asking is about. So he's saying there's risks, which are things that could happen in the future, and issues which are backward looking, I guess is what he's saying. And what's one become the other and vice versa.
Yeah. I think. In answer to that, I mean, yes, there is always that crossover between risk and issues in any organisation, and the movement from a risk which may never occur to an issue that does occur. And once again, I think all I can do, given the length of the question, is just to have a look back and perhaps refresh things ready for in line with what his questions are set them.
Yeah, I'm happy to either put them in writing myself to you, or maybe get him to David to write to you directly on that point.
Yeah, I think that would be the most useful thing. Thank you on that. Mr. Grimes?
Yeah, I just really want to pick up on that. I mean, as I say, I'm probably the only person left from the previous committee. There was discussions going on as to actually the role of this committee, and I think that runs into a bit of that as to what sort of information this committee needs to fulfil its role around governance, as opposed to operational management or anything like that. And as Neil and Declan will know, we had some discussions around that, and I think this would be another opportunity to clarify some of those points, because when I first joined the committee, I started asking some questions that perhaps fell into operational type things, and we had some discussions about that. So I think a bit of clarity around that again would perhaps be quite useful. Because listening to what was just really suggested there, I would suggest that, and again, I work in education, that if somebody's talking about risk management within an academy setting, which I also deal with, you'd be looking at things in a very different way than you would be looking at them as a member of a corporate governance committee overseeing things.
Yeah, I think, yeah, if anybody's got any sort of thoughts about sort of, what information they do want, and obviously clearly let me know or let Neil know. I think I was last on this committee about 10 years ago, so I agree with what Neil says about sometimes the information we used to have was probably a bit too much at the time. So perhaps if there is a thought that we don't have what we need, to do let me know or directly to Neil, and we'll get read on the agenda. Anything else? No. So moving on to the recommendations then. Regarding recommendation A, the committee is asked to approve the current status of the corporate strategic risk facing the County Council. I'm happy to move this recommendation. Can I have a seconder, please? Mr. Poland, is that agreed? Yeah. So recommendation B, it's been suggested that the chair is contacted near to the next meeting to agree the next presentation. I'm happy to do this in consultation with other group spokespeople if that's also. Is that agreed as well? Yeah, excellent. And then regarding recommendation C, can I take the update is duly noted? Read. Yeah, excellent. Moving on then to item 14, which is the annual counter fraud report. And again, Neil.
Thanks again, Chair. So, yes, this is my final report today. And again, the committee is responsible for monitoring how effective we are in mitigating the risk of fraud. So that falls down to my internal audit team, and I've introduced them before. So Scott and Lynn do a lot of legwork on fraud and proactive and reactive fraud, and then Matt oversees that and makes sure we're all on track. So for a small team, we're quite ahead of the game. We self-assess against the risk of fraud and corruption guide. We had that peer reviewed, which came out really, really positive. So I'm quite pleased with that. We issue a lot of proactive information out to staff members through regular bulletins and update our policies accordingly. The way we used to report on fraud risk was part of the risk management report, which has just gone through there. But we, as part of our sort of self-effectiveness and also the external auditors did put some recommendation through about having an annual report. So this is the inaugural annual counter fraud report, which is attached as an appendix. I think just the headlines from that are, thankfully, being the sort of organisation we are, we don't have a range of high fraud risks like council tax. We don't have those services, benefits, etc., etc. We do, however, have, we need to be very aware of some of the fraud areas which regularly come up on fraud risk registers, and that is in terms of our direct payments outlay. We pay a lot of money out direct payments. We also have a lot of procurement, so procurement fraud is very, high, and also we've got IT. Our colleagues earlier on talking about IT. So we're well aware of those in our fraud risk assessment. We're not taking our eye off the ball. We also then have got our reactive work. So there is a section of the report that talks about our reactive work. We obviously can't say too much because it's a public committee. And then the back end of the report talks about a lot of the good work that's involved in our proactive work. So I think that's all I need to say on the report, Chair. I'd gladly take any questions.
Okay. Any questions or comments on the committee? No. Okay, so the committee is asked to note the report, to agree to receive further reports on an annual basis, and to agree that unless a major issue arises or there is a government requirement for more regular reporting, dispense with in-year counter fraud updates, which currently form part of the wider risk management update reports presented at each meeting of this committee. So I'm happy to move that recommendation. Is there a seconder? Yeah, Mr. Crook, all agreed? Excellent. Thank you very much. So moving on.
Apologies, Chair. I just need to lead to another meeting.
Okay, Mr. Morse, thank you. Item 15, the SIPFA Financial Management Code. And again, I think this is Nick to present this one.
Yep, thank you, Chair. So this report starts page 175 of your packs, and it informs the committee of the Council's compliance with the SIPFA Financial Management Code for the year 25-26. The code was introduced to support good practice in financial management and to assist local authorities in demonstrating their financial sustainability. Code is based on a series of 6 principles supported by 7 specific standards, and these are assessed against in the appendix. These are what are considered necessary for a local authority to have a strong foundation to financially manage short, medium and long-term finances, manage financial resilience to meet unforeseen demands on services, and to manage unexpected shocks in the financial circumstances. Council has undertaken a self-assessment of the Council's compliance with the requirements of the code for the latest position in 25-26 and areas for further development. The assessment is attached as Appendix A, and the assessment also includes an update on recommendations made throughout the year by the external auditor, with the latest progress reported in Appendix B. The assessment shows that the Council meets the requirements of the Financial Management Code with some minor areas for improvement, as reported in the appendices. The Internal Audit Service has undertaken a high-level review of the assessment and concluded that there are no other issues to report. So, yeah, the committee is asked to note the report.
Thank you, Nick. Any questions or comments? No, so as it's been said, the committee is asked to note the report. Is that agreed? Against? Yeah, I think that's unanimous. Okay, so then we move on to item 16, which is the annual report on the operations of contract procedure rules. I think Kay Springthorpe is here. Welcome, Kay.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm here to present the report on the operations of the Council's contract procedure rules for the period of 1st of April 2024 to 31st of March this year. The report outlines how the Council has adhered to its formal procurement rules that are set out in Part 4G of our Constitution, ensuring that all procurement activity that we run remains legal, fair, transparent and delivers value for money. In February 2025, significant changes were made to the procurement regulations with the introduction of the Procurement Act 2023. And in response to that, we updated our constitution to include a new set of contract procedure rules that aligned with that revised legislation. So these changes were formally approved by full council and came into force or into effect on the 24th of February this year. Throughout this last financial year, there have been 75 exceptions that have been approved under Rule 6 of what were the Public Contract Regulations set of rules and Rule 57, the Procurement Act. 2 of those have exceeded the UK procurement threshold. This is a marked improvement attributed to a corporate procurement board that we put in place to basically increase oversight and give some enhanced training as well to staff members and people that are involved in procurement. There have been 21 contract extensions or modifications that have been approved under Rule 30 of the Public Contract Regulations element and Rule 46 and 48 of the Procurement Act. These basically reflect the transitional compliance that we needed to do as we shifted to the new legislation. And under the provider selection regime, which was implemented in January 2024, to date, we've awarded 11 contracts, 1 under Process A, 3 under Process B, 5 under Process C, and 2 under a competitive procedure. So chief officers continue to review exceptions and modifications quarterly, which ensures strong governance, and the committee is essentially just asked to note the contents of this report.
Thank you very much, Kay. Any member questions or comments on this report? No? Okay, so we're asked to to note the operation of contract procedure rules between the 1st of April 24 and 1st of March 25. Happy to move this recommendation. Is it seconded, please? Mr. Poland, all agreed? Excellent. So we've done items 17 and 18. So 19, the date of the next meeting will be Friday, the 19th of September. And as I said at the start, there are no urgent business items. So I declare the meeting closed at 12:27. Thank you all for your attendance. And thank you very much to officers for bearing with us while we went out and showed respect to the armed forces. I think that was important. Thank you very much. Cheers.